All right, so what if I told you the key to making cervical cancer screening way less stressful and a lot more efficient wasn't some brand new, super fancy technology, but just running the same test twice? It sounds almost too simple, right? Well, a huge study called ESTAMPA just looked into this exact idea, and honestly, what they found could really change the game for millions of women.
Okay, to really get why this is such a big deal, you have to start with this one kind of incredible fact about our bodies. Get this. Somewhere between 60 and 80% of all HPV infections, the virus that causes most cervical cancers, they just go away. Poof. Our own immune system takes care of them, usually in about a year or two. They're just temporary visitors, not permanent residents.
So that leads to the million-dollar question, right? If our bodies are so good at kicking out most of these infections, why does a single positive HPV test so often kick off this whole domino effect of follow-up appointments, a ton of anxiety, and sometimes even more invasive procedures?
And that, right there, is the big puzzle of modern HPV screening. See, the tests we have are fantastic at detecting the virus. Doctors call this being highly sensitive. But the flip side is that their specificity isn't as great. Think of it like this. The test casts a super wide net. It catches everything, including all those temporary infections that were never going to cause a problem. This creates a whole lot of false alarms, flagging women who aren't really at high risk.
This is where this medical idea called triage comes into play. It's really just a fancy word for sorting. The whole point is to figure out of all those positive tests, which women actually need a closer look and which ones we can confidently say, hey, this is likely a harmless temporary thing. It's all about avoiding unnecessary stress and procedures.
So, the critical question for everyone, doctors, patients, you name it, is what's the best way to sort them? How do we efficiently and, accurately tell the difference between the harmless infections that'll just disappear and the persistent ones that we really need to keep an eye on? So let's take a quick look at some of the tools we're currently using for this sorting job. You can see the trade-offs right away. You've got visual inspection, or VI. It's super sensitive, so it catches most disease, but its specificity is pretty low, which means, yep, a lot of false alarms. Then you have the classic pap smear, which is kind of the opposite. It's much better at avoiding those false alarms, but it can miss more of the actual cases. It's this constant balancing act, which is what brings us back to this simple idea of just repeating the HPV test.
And here's the thing. A lot of these existing methods are, complicated. Their accuracy can be all over the place, they often require highly trained specialists, new equipment, and frankly, they just aren't practical for every clinic in every part of the world. We really need something simpler.
And this is where the ESTAMPA study comes in, with its beautifully simple idea. What if the best way to sort out the temporary infections from the persistent ones is to just wait a little bit and test again?
The way they set up the study was super straightforward. First, they screened a massive group, over 44,000 women in Latin America. Then, any woman who tested positive was asked to come back for a follow-up visit about 2 months later. And at that second visit, before doing anything else, they just did another HPV test. Simple as that.
And just to be clear, we are not talking about a small trial here. The final analysis included data from almost 5,400 women who tested positive. A study of that size, that gives the results some real weight, some real statistical power.
So the big question is, did it work? Did the simple second-look strategy actually make a difference? Let's dive into what they found. Okay, this is the headline finding, and it's pretty staggering. Almost 40% of the women who were positive on that first test tested negative just 2 months later. I mean, just let that sink in. That's nearly 4 out of every 10 women who could potentially avoid a follow-up procedure and all the stress that comes with it just by waiting a little bit.
Okay, but the immediate question is, did this strategy miss the dangerous stuff? And the data says, for the most part, no. The retest was still very sensitive, catching about 85% of all the high-grade lesions or cancers. So it did a great job filtering out a lot of unnecessary referrals without really compromising safety for the vast majority of women.
But, and there's always a but, right? Here's the catch. That specificity we talked about, the test's ability to correctly identify those who don't have a persistent problem, was pretty low. And what that meant in practice was that a lot of women, somewhere between 60 and 70%, still tested positive on the retest. So they still got sent for follow-up anyway.
And this is where the details get really fascinating. It turns out not all HPV tests are created equal. They use 2 different types, and one of them, called the COBAS test, is designed to be extra sensitive. But in this case, that extra sensitivity kind of backfired.
It led to even lower specificity, meaning it created way more of those false alarms on the retest compared to the other one.
The researchers also stumbled onto something else that's super important: timing. It turns out the longer they waited between that first test and the second one, the better the specificity got. When they waited, say, an average of 5 months, it gave more of those temporary infections time to clear out on their own. And that made the retest much, much better at just filtering out the noise.
So based on all that data, the study came to a pretty clear conclusion. Waiting a bit longer, maybe closer to 6 months instead of just 2, might be the real sweet spot. That seems to be the best way to maximize the number of women who can be safely told you're all good without needing more procedures.
Okay, so what does all this mean in the real world? Is this retest strategy a practical new option in the fight against cervical cancer?
Well, like anything, there's a trade-off. The big pro, it's just so simple and practical. You don't need new machines, you don't need special clinical training. Labs can just use the exact same stuff they already have. But on the con side, it does still refer a lot of women for follow-up, it adds the cost of a second test, and hey, like any screening strategy out there, it's not going to be 100% perfect.
In the end, the researchers themselves summed it up pretty well. They concluded that, yeah, short-term repeat HPV testing may be a viable and practical option for sorting women who test positive, especially in places where those other, more complicated methods just aren't available.
So let's just boil this all down. What's the bottom line? A simple retest can stop almost 40% of women from going through immediate and potentially unnecessary follow-up procedures. Now, it's not a perfect solution. That referral rate is still pretty high, but it's a super practical tool. And you can make it even smarter by combining it with other info, like specifically checking for the highest risk HPV types, numbers 16 and 18, to prioritize who needs care most urgently.
And you know, this whole idea could get even more powerful down the road. Just imagine if that second test didn't even require another trip to the clinic. What if women could just do a self-collection kit at home for the retest? The whole process would become so much simpler, so much more accessible for everyone. Which kind of leaves us with one last thought to chew on. You know, in our super high-tech world of medicine, we're always looking for the next big thing. But maybe, just maybe, the most elegant solution is also the simplest one. Could just waiting a bit and testing again be the smartest next step we take in preventing cervical cancer?
Everything we've talked about today comes from that ESTAMPA study, which was published in the British Journal of Cancer. Thanks so much for tuning in for this explainer.